The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, typed on official-looking letterhead with enough legal jargon to make my coffee taste bitter. And it informed me that my beehives were in violation of Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association regulations and would be removed by force if I didn't comply within 14 days. I stood on my back porch in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, staring at the 3 white boxes humming peacefully in the corner of my yard, wondering what kind of person wakes up and decides that honeybees are public enemy number 1. My name is Xavier Jenkins, and I had moved into this cookie-cutter neighborhood 6 months ago after my divorce, thinking that a fresh start in a quiet community would help me rebuild. The beehives had been my therapy, my way of connecting with something real and purposeful after years of a failing marriage. Now some bureaucrat with too much time on their hands wanted to take that away. The letter was signed by Patricia Moreland, HOA president, with a phone number listed at the bottom. I checked my watch. 9 in the morning seemed like a reasonable time to call someone who was trying to ruin my day. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and nasal. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, Patricia speaking. Hi Patricia, this is Xavier Jenkins from 4782 Saguaro Drive. I just got your letter about my beehives. Oh yes, Mr. Jenkins. Her tone shifted into what I can only describe as weaponized politeness. I'm glad you're calling to discuss your compliance timeline. Those hives are quite the eyesore, and several neighbors have expressed concerns. Eyesore. They're small white boxes in the back corner of my yard. You can barely see them from the street. Nevertheless, they violate our aesthetic guidelines. Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenant clearly states that no livestock or agricultural operations are permitted on residential properties. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Bees aren't livestock, they're pollinators. They help the entire neighborhood's gardens grow, and I'm not running a farm here. These are 3 small hives for personal use. The board has made its decision, Mr. Jenkins. The hives must go, or we'll be forced to take action. We have the authority to remove them ourselves and bill you for the service, plus a fine of $250 per day until you're in compliance. My jaw clenched. You're not coming onto my property to touch anything. Then I suggest you remove them yourself. You have 14 days. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there with my phone pressed to my ear, listening to dead air and feeling my blood pressure spike. My neighbor Tom had warned me about Patricia when I first moved in. He had called her a nightmare wrapped in a pantsuit, someone who measured grass height with a ruler and sent violation notices if your mailbox wasn't the exact approved shade of black. I had laughed it off at the time, figuring he was exaggerating. Now I understood he had been understating the problem. The bees continued their peaceful work, oblivious to the bureaucratic storm brewing around them. I had started with 1 hive in March, then expanded to 3 as I learned more about beekeeping. The hobby had given me something to focus on besides the wreckage of my personal life. Every weekend I would check the frames, watch the workers build their perfect hexagonal cells, and harvest small amounts of honey that tasted like sunshine and desert wildflowers. My daughter Emma loved visiting and watching them through the mesh of my beekeeping suit. I wasn't giving them up without a fight. The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, held monthly meetings at the community center, a bland stucco building near the neighborhood entrance. I marked the next meeting on my calendar, 2 weeks away, and started doing my homework. Arizona state law regarding beekeeping was surprisingly specific. As long as hives were maintained at least 20 feet from property lines, and the beekeeper provided a water source so the bees didn't bother neighbors' pools, they were perfectly legal. My hives met all those requirements and then some. I also discovered that HOA covenants couldn't actually override state law. If something was legal at the state level, the HOA could regulate it but not ban it entirely. I printed out the relevant statutes and case law, building a file that grew thicker by the day. The morning of the HOA meeting, I suited up in business casual and grabbed my folder of documents. Tom caught me as I was leaving and offered to come along as moral support. His wife had been hit with a violation notice for planting native desert plants instead of the approved water-hungry grass, so he had his own axe to grind with Patricia and her board. The community center was already half full when we arrived. I recognized most of the faces, neighbors I waved to while getting the mail or taking out trash. Patricia stood at the front near a folding table, shuffling papers and conferring with two other women who I assumed were board members. She was exactly what I had pictured, mid-50s, blonde highlights that looked painted on, and a face that seemed stuck in a permanent expression of disapproval. She wore a navy blazer with gold buttons that caught the fluorescent lights. The meeting started with parliamentary procedure that felt designed to bore everyone into submission. Minutes from the last meeting. Treasurer's report. Discussion of repainting the community sign. I waited through 20 minutes of minutiae before they finally got to new business. "We have a resident here to discuss a violation notice," Patricia said, looking directly at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Jenkins, would you like to address the board?" I stood up, folder in hand. "Yes, thank you." I received a notice saying my beehives violate HOA regulations and need to be removed. I'm here to explain why that notice is incorrect. The covenant is quite clear, Mr. Jenkins. No livestock. Bees aren't livestock under Arizona law. They're considered beneficial insects and are explicitly protected for agricultural and personal use. I opened my folder and pulled out the first printout. Arizona Revised Statute 3-1201 defines them as agricultural assets, and HOAs cannot ban them outright under state law. Patricia's smile tightened. "Our covenants predate that statute." "That doesn't matter. State law supersedes HOA rules. You can regulate placement and number of hives, but you can't ban them completely. I've placed mine in compliance with all state requirements. 25 feet from all property lines, water source provided, proper registration with the county." One of the other board members, a woman with gray hair and reading glasses, leaned forward. "Are they dangerous? I've heard Africanized bees are a problem in Arizona." "These are European honeybees, very gentle. I've had kids visit and watch them without any issues. In 6 months, I haven't had a single sting complaint from neighbors because my bees are well managed and stay in my yard." Patricia cut in before I could continue. "The aesthetic concern remains. Multiple neighbors have complained." "Which neighbors?" I asked. "I'd like to know who has an issue so I can address their concerns directly. That's confidential." "Then how do I know anyone actually complained? For all I know, you're the only one with a problem." Her face flushed pink. "Mr. Jenkins, your tone is inappropriate. The board has made its decision based on multiple complaints and our interpretation of the covenants. We will be moving forward with enforcement unless you voluntarily remove the hives." Tom stood up from beside me. "You can't just make up complaints and hide behind confidentiality. Show us the documentation or admit you're overreaching." Patricia's voice went icy. "Mr. Walters, you are not recognized to speak. Sit down or leave." "This is supposed to be an open meeting," Tom shot back. "Security, please escort Mr. Walters out." I hadn't even noticed there was security, but a bored-looking guy in a rent-a-cop uniform shuffled over. Tom held up his hands and walked out on his own, shooting me an apologetic look. I suddenly felt very alone in a room full of people who were looking anywhere except at me. As I was saying, Patricia continued, smoothing her blazer, "You have 9 days remaining on your notice. We will be conducting an inspection on day 15, and if the hives are still present, they will be removed and disposed of. This meeting is adjourned." I wanted to argue more, but the board members were already packing up. The other residents filtered out quickly, avoiding eye contact. One older man patted my shoulder as he passed and whispered, "Good luck, son. You're going to need it." Outside, Tom was leaning against his truck. "Well, that went great. She's not going to back down." "Nope. Patricia doesn't back down. She enjoys the power trip too much. Last year she tried to force the Hendersons to paint their house a different color because their beige was 2 shades off the approved palette. Cost them $3,000 before they caved." "I'm not caving." "Good. You shouldn't. But watch your back. Patricia has friends on the local council, and she's not above making life difficult for people who cross her." I drove home feeling like I just painted a target on my back. But every time I doubted myself, I thought about my daughter's face lighting up when she saw the bees, or the satisfaction of harvesting honey I had helped produce. This wasn't just about insects. It was about standing up to a bully who had been allowed to run roughshod over people for too long. The next morning, I found my garbage cans knocked over and trash strewn across my driveway. It could have been raccoons or kids, but the timing felt suspicious. I cleaned it up and installed a security camera that afternoon, mounting it to capture my front yard and the side where the beehive sat. 2 days later, I got another letter. This one informed me that my front lawn was 1 inch over the approved height and I had 24 hours to mow it or face a $50 fine. I measured my grass with a ruler. It was exactly 2.5 inches, the maximum allowed height. Someone had measured it and decided to round up. The pettiness was almost impressive. I mowed anyway, cutting it shorter than required, and sent Patricia an email with time-stamped photos and measurements. She didn't respond. Day 12 of my 14-day notice period arrived with unseasonable heat, pushing past 100 degrees before noon. I was working from home, my laptop set up at the kitchen table, when I heard shouting from the backyard. I ran to the window and saw 2 men in my yard, one of them holding what looked like a spray bottle and approaching my hives. I bolted out the back door. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" The men turned. They wore matching polo shirts with a pest control company logo. The closer one held up his hands. "Whoa, man, we're just doing our job. HOA hired us to remove some bee problems." "Those aren't bee problems, those are my property. Get out of my yard right now." "We got a work order," the second guy said, pulling a paper from his back pocket. "Says we're supposed to remove unauthorized bee colonies." "Your work order doesn't override my property rights. You're trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the police." They exchanged glances. The first guy shrugged. "Not worth the hassle, we'll call the office." They retreated through the side gate they had apparently jimmied open. I was shaking with adrenaline and anger. The 14 days weren't even up yet, and Patricia was already trying to have my hives destroyed. I checked the lock on the gate and found it bent, clearly forced. That was breaking and entering. I pulled out my phone and reviewed the security footage, which had captured everything. This time I did call the police. The officer who responded was a young Hispanic guy named Martinez, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He took my statement, watched the security footage on my phone, and wrote down the pest control company's information. "You want to press charges for trespassing?" he asked. "Yes. And I want it documented that the HOA president hired them to destroy my property without legal authority." Martinez scratched his jaw. HOA stuff usually falls under civil court, but the trespassing and property damage to your gate, that's criminal. I'll file a report. You should probably also get a lawyer. I'm starting to think I need one. After he left, I sat on my back porch watching the bees fly in and out of their hives, carrying pollen in shades of yellow and orange. They had no idea they were at the center of a suburban war. I envied them their simple purpose. Tom came by that evening with a six-pack of beer and the name of a real estate attorney who had helped him with some property line disputes. "Linda Vaughn," he said, handing me a business card. "She's sharp, doesn't take crap from anyone, and she hates HOA overreach. Mention my name." I called Linda the next morning and got an appointment for that afternoon. Her office was in a modest building in Scottsdale, all glass and steel, trying to look more important than it was. Linda herself was probably 40, with dark hair pulled back and a no-nonsense handshake. "Tom says Patricia Moreland is making your life hell," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Welcome to the club. I've dealt with her before. She genuinely believes she's protecting property values when really she's just addicted to control." I laid out the whole situation, showing her the letters, the security footage, and my research on Arizona bee law. She listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. "You're right about state law," she said when I finished. "HOAs in Arizona cannot ban beehives outright. They can regulate them, but prohibition isn't allowed. The problem is that Patricia knows most people won't fight back, so she pushes until someone either gives up or lawyers up. She's banking on you being too tired or too poor to do the latter. So what are my options? File an injunction preventing them from removing your hives. I can have that drafted today and filed tomorrow. It'll cost you about $1,500 upfront. We'll also send a cease and desist letter making it clear that any further trespassing or property damage will result in additional legal action. If they keep pushing, we can sue for harassment and attorney's fees." $1,500 was a lot of money on my single income budget, but so was replacing beehives and dealing with ongoing fines and violations. "Do it," Linda smiled. "Good. I'll need a retainer and your signature on a few documents. Patricia is going to lose her mind when she gets served, so prepare yourself for escalation before things get better." She wasn't kidding about the escalation. The injunction was filed on day 13, one day before Patricia's deadline. Linda had it served to Patricia at her house, a move that was legally unnecessary but psychologically satisfying. According to Linda's process server, Patricia had turned purple and slammed the door so hard the wreath fell off. That night, someone egged my car. The security camera caught two figures in hoodies, but their faces weren't visible. The police report I filed joined the growing pile of documentation about HOA harassment. The next violation letter arrived 3 days later. My house numbers were apparently the wrong font. They needed to be replaced with approved numerals within 7 days. I checked the covenants. There was no specification about house number fonts. Patricia was just making things up now. Linda sent another letter. Each one cost me money, but each one also built our case that this was targeted harassment. Then, Patricia made her biggest mistake. It was a Saturday morning, and I was inside making breakfast when I heard an engine rumble into my driveway. I looked out to see a full-size pickup truck with 3 people in the cab, backing up toward my side gate. The bent lock from the pest control incident hadn't been fully repaired yet, and they were clearly planning to take advantage. I grabbed my phone and ran outside, already recording. Patricia herself was in the passenger seat, along with 2 men I didn't recognize. They were unloading what looked like empty containers from the truck bed. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted. Patricia climbed down from the truck, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that somehow still managed to look authoritarian. Enforcing HOA regulations, Mr. Jenkins. You've been given ample opportunity to comply. I have a court-ordered injunction preventing you from touching my property. You were served 3 days ago. That injunction is procedural nonsense. Our covenants give us the right to abate violations. No, they don't. Not when state law protects what I'm doing. Leave now or you're trespassing, and this time I have video of you personally. One of the men, a beefy guy in a cowboy's cap, stepped forward. Maybe you should just let us do our job, buddy. Make this easier on everyone. Your job is to leave my property. We're authorized by the HOA, Patricia said, her voice rising. You don't get to just ignore our authority. Watch me. I had already dialed 911 on my phone, holding it up so they could see. The operator came on, and I calmly explained that I had multiple trespassers refusing to leave my property. Patricia's face went from red to white as she realized I was serious. You're making a huge mistake, she hissed. No, you are. You're violating a court order and trespassing, all on video. The two men were already backing toward the truck. The bigger one muttered something to Patricia that I couldn't hear. She stood her ground for another moment, then whirled around and stalked back to the truck. This isn't over, she called as they drove away. I know, I said to the empty driveway. The police arrived 10 minutes later, this time sending 2 officers. I showed them the footage, the injunction paperwork, and the history of escalating harassment. They took it more seriously than Officer Martinez had, probably because I now had a pattern of documented incidents, and Patricia had been caught on camera. We'll pay her a visit, the older officer said, a stern-looking woman named Rodriguez. Make it clear that she needs to back off. You might also want to consider a restraining order if she keeps this up. Can HOA presidents even be restrained from HOA duties? If those duties involve criminal trespass and harassment, yes. Talk to your lawyer. I called Linda immediately after they left. She was delighted. Oh, this is perfect. Patricia just handed us everything we need. I'm filing for a restraining order Monday morning, and we're going to sue for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress. I'll also be sending a demand letter to the HOA board itself, separate from Patricia, informing them that their president is exposing them to massive liability. Will that work? Boards are made of homeowners who don't want their own property values tanking because of legal judgments. Once they realize Patricia is going to cost them real money, they'll throw her under the bus so fast it'll leave skid marks. That evening, my daughter Emma called. She was 12, living with her mother in Tucson but visiting me every other weekend. Dad, are you okay? Mom said she heard you're having problems with your neighbors. Just some HOA stuff, sweetie. Nothing to worry about. Is it about the bees? I told my class about them for my science project. Everyone thought it was cool. My chest tightened. Yeah, it's about the bees, but I'm handling it. They're going to be fine, I promise. Good. I want to help you harvest honey next time I visit. After we hung up, I walked out to the backyard and stood near the hives as the sun set. The bees were settling in for the night. They're humming quieter now. I had started this hobby as a way to heal, to find purpose. I hadn't expected to end up in a legal battle that was draining my bank account and my energy. But I also hadn't expected to care this much about 3 boxes of insects and the principle they represented. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Linda coached me on what to expect, how to present myself to the judge, and what questions I might be asked. I took the morning off work, put on my one good suit, and met Linda at the courthouse in downtown Phoenix. Patricia showed up with her own lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who probably charged 3 times what Linda did. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, Patricia's face locked in an expression of wounded righteousness. She had dressed like she was going to church, complete with pearls and a demure cardigan. The judge was a woman in her 60s who looked like she had seen every permutation of human petness and was tired of all of it. She reviewed the filings quickly, then looked up at both parties. "Miss Vaughn, you're asking for a restraining order against Miss Moreland on behalf of your client. Walk me through the basis for this request." Linda stood. "Your Honor, we have documented evidence of escalating harassment, multiple instances of trespassing, attempted property destruction, and violation of a court-ordered injunction. All of this stems from Miss Moreland's position as HOA president and her insistence on removing my client's legally maintained beehives." Patricia's lawyer, who had introduced himself as Richard Steele, stood. "Your Honor, Miss Moreland was acting in her capacity as HOA president to enforce legitimate covenants. Any visits to the property were in service of that duty. Breaking into someone's yard to destroy their property isn't an HOA duty," Linda shot back. "It's criminal trespass." The judge held up a hand. "I've reviewed the video evidence submitted. Miss Moreland, did you go to Mr. Jenkins' property with the intention of removing his beehives?" Patricia stood, her voice quavering. "Your Honor, I was trying to maintain the standards of our community. Mr. Jenkins has been uncooperative and hostile. That's not what I asked." "Did you go to his property to remove the beehives?" "I went to enforce our covenants, after being served with an injunction preventing exactly that action." Patricia's lawyer jumped in. "Your Honor, the HOA has a good faith belief that the covenants give them authority to remove violations." "State law disagrees, Counselor, and good faith doesn't extend to ignoring court orders." The judge flipped through more pages. "I'm granting the restraining order. Miss Moreland, you are to stay at least 100 yards from Mr. Jenkins' property and have no direct or indirect contact with him. The HOA may communicate regarding legitimate matters through legal counsel only. Violation of this order will result in contempt charges. Do you understand?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm and answered for her. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Next case." Outside the courthouse, Linda was practically glowing. "That was beautiful. Did you see her face? I feel like I just won a battle, but not the war." "You're probably right. But now we have leverage. I'm sending that demand letter to the HOA board today. Patricia has become a liability, and they need to know it." I went back to work and tried to focus on my actual job, the one that paid the bills. My boss had been understanding about the time off, but I could tell he was getting concerned about my divided attention. I stayed late that night catching up, then drove home through the purple desert sunset feeling drained. The next development came from an unexpected direction. I got a call from a woman who introduced herself as Margaret Chen, a member of the HOA board. Her voice was hesitant, apologetic. "Mr. Jenkins, I want to apologize for how this situation has been handled. Several board members weren't aware of the full extent of Patricia's actions. We received your attorney's letter and we've been reviewing everything. I'm calling to ask if you would be willing to meet with the board, without Patricia present, to discuss a resolution." I was immediately suspicious. "What kind of resolution?" "We want to drop all violation notices related to your beehives and formally recognize them as permitted under the covenants, in compliance with state law. We're also prepared to reimburse you for reasonable legal fees and repair costs to your gate." "What about Patricia?" There was a pause. "The board is taking that matter very seriously. I can't discuss personnel issues, but I think you'll find the situation improving significantly going forward." I told her I would discuss it with Linda and get back to her. When I called Linda, she laughed. They're panicking. Patricia probably cost them their insurance carrier's goodwill, and they're looking at a lawsuit that could run into 6 figures if we push it. Meet with them, but I'm coming with you, and we're getting everything in writing. The meeting happened 3 days later at the community center, in the same room where I had been publicly dismissed. This time, only 4 board members attended. Margaret Chen, the gray-haired woman who had asked about Africanized bees, and 2 men I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. No Patricia. Margaret led the discussion, laying out essentially what she had offered on the phone. Complete recognition of my beehives as permitted, all violations dropped, reimbursement for my gate repair and half my legal fees to date. What about the harassment? I asked. The egging, the garbage, all of it. We can't prove who did those things, one of the men said carefully. But the board is prepared to issue a formal statement that such behavior is unacceptable and will be investigated if it continues. Linda tapped her pen on her notepad. What about Patricia? Is she still president? Margaret glanced at the others before answering. Patricia has resigned her position, effective immediately. She cited personal reasons. The board will be electing a new president next week, so they had forced her out. I felt a mix of satisfaction and something else, maybe pity. Patricia had turned a simple disagreement into a crusade that had cost her a position she clearly valued, all over some bees. I want one more thing, I said. A formal amendment to the covenants explicitly permitting beekeeping in compliance with state regulations, not just for me, but for any homeowner who wants to keep bees. So this can't happen to anyone else. The board members exchanged looks. Margaret nodded slowly. That will require a vote of the full membership, but the board can sponsor the amendment. I think given the circumstances, it would pass. Linda and I stepped out to confer. She thought it was the best deal I was likely to get without dragging everything through months of litigation. I agreed, with the caveat that the covenant amendment was non-negotiable. We signed the agreement that night. I walked out of the community center feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Tom was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. Heard Patricia got the boot, he said. News travels fast. This is an HOA. Gossip is the primary currency. Everyone knows everything by the next day, so your bees are safe. Yeah, and nobody else will have to fight this battle. Good, you did the whole neighborhood a favor. Patricia was a terror. Maybe now we can get someone reasonable in charge. I drove home and went straight to the backyard. The bees were active in the late afternoon sun, coming and going from the hives in steady streams. I suited up and did a quick inspection, checking the frames and the health of the colonies. Everything looked good. The queen in the first hive had been busy, and I found frames full of capped brood. The honey stores were building up nicely for the coming cooler months. My phone rang while I was closing up the last hive. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Mr. Jenkins. A woman's voice, not one I recognized. This is Donna Mitchell. I live 3 streets over from you. I heard about your situation with the HOA and wanted to thank you. I've been wanting to start beekeeping for years, but I was afraid of exactly what happened to you. Now maybe I can actually do it. We talked for 15 minutes about bee breeds, hive placement, and local beekeeping supply stores. By the time we hung up, she was planning to take a beginner's course in the spring. 2 more neighbors called over the next week with similar stories. Apparently, the suburban appetite for beekeeping was much larger than anyone had realized, suppressed by fear of HOA retaliation. The covenant amendment vote happened at the next monthly meeting. I attended but didn't speak, letting Margaret present it as a board-sponsored measure to bring the HOA into compliance with state law. It passed with 70% approval. A handful of old-timers voted against it on principle, and a few people abstained, but the majority were either indifferent or actively supportive. Patricia didn't attend. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had been avoiding community events, embarrassed by her forced resignation. I spotted her once at the grocery store and she turned down a different aisle immediately. The restraining order was still in effect, and I wasn't about to push the issue. Life started returning to normal. I focused on work, on Emma's visits, on the therapeutic routine of tending my hives. The honey harvest in October was spectacular, yielding 30 pounds of amber liquid that I bottled and gave to friends and neighbors. Emma helped with the bottling, carefully filling jars and designing labels on my computer. She was proud of what we had done, not just the honey but the stand we had taken. Then November arrived, and with it, a final confrontation I hadn't anticipated. I was in the backyard on a Saturday morning, doing maintenance on the hives before winter, when I heard my front doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I pulled off my gloves and walked around to see who it was. Patricia Moreland stood on my front porch. My first instinct was to tell her she was violating the restraining order and to leave immediately. But something in her posture stopped me. She looked smaller somehow, defeated. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail and she wore jeans and a plain jacket. No power suit, no armor. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," she said before I could speak. "I'll leave right now if you want, but I needed to apologize in person." I should have told her to leave. The restraining order was clear, but I was curious, and maybe a small part of me wanted to hear what she had to say. "You have 5 minutes," she nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since everything happened." Therapy, actually. My husband insisted after I lost the HOA position, and I realized that I turned that role into my entire identity. After my kids grew up and moved away, after I retired from teaching, the HOA was the only place where I felt like I mattered, where people had to listen to me. "So you became a tyrant?" "Yes." She didn't flinch from the word. I told myself I was protecting the neighborhood, maintaining standards, but really, I was just addicted to the control. And when you pushed back, when you actually stood up to me, I couldn't handle it. I escalated instead of backing down because backing down meant admitting I was wrong. "You cost me thousands of dollars. You tried to destroy my property. You sent people to trespass on my land." "I know, and I can't undo any of that. I'm selling my house. Moving to Flagstaff to be near my daughter. I won't be in this neighborhood anymore, and honestly, I can't face people here after what I did. But before I left, I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. You were right about the bees, about the law, about everything. I was wrong." We stood there in silence for a moment. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to tell her that her apology didn't fix anything. But I could see genuine remorse in her eyes, and I remembered what my therapist had told me during my divorce. Sometimes people do terrible things out of pain and fear, and recognizing that doesn't excuse them, but it does help you let go. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for in Flagstaff." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you. And for what it's worth, I tried some of your honey. Someone gave me a jar before they knew it was from you. It was excellent." She walked back to her car, got in, and drove away. I stood on my porch for a long time afterward, processing what had just happened. It wasn't the ending I had expected, but it felt like closure nonetheless. The restraining order expired after 6 months, and I didn't renew it. Patricia's house sold in December, and according to Tom, she moved to Flagstaff as she had said. The new HOA president was a retired engineer named Bob who ran meetings efficiently and only cared about regulations that actually mattered. The neighborhood relaxed, became friendlier. Tom's native plant garden was suddenly approved without explanation. Other small violations that had been building up quietly disappeared. 3 more neighbors started keeping bees. Donna Mitchell, who had called me after the whole thing concluded, became an enthusiastic beekeeper and started a neighborhood beekeeping club. We met monthly to discuss techniques and share resources. What had started as my private therapy became a small community of people finding joy in the same thing. Emma's science project about bees won second place at her school's science fair. She was disappointed not to get first, but I told her that second place was incredible and that I was proud of her. She made me promise that when she came for summer vacation, we could expand to a 4th hive. I agreed, thinking about how something good had come from all the chaos. Linda called me in January to close out my case file. The HOA had paid the agreed-upon fees and everything was settled legally. "You know, you should be proud," she said. "Most people would have just given up. You fought for something you cared about and you won. That's rare." It didn't feel like winning while it was happening. It never does. But you changed things for your entire community. That matters. After we hung up, I bundled up against the unusual cold snap Phoenix was experiencing and went out to check the hives. Winter in the desert is mild compared to most places, but the bees still clustered together for warmth and reduced their activity. I smoked the entrance gently and lifted the top of the first hive, checking their honey stores to make sure they would make it through the cooler months. Everything looked healthy. The cluster was tight and active, the bees humming contentedly. I closed it back up and moved to the second hive, then the third. All of them were thriving, the queen still laying, the workers still doing their jobs. They had no idea they had been at the center of a suburban war, that people had fought legal battles and spent thousands of dollars over their right to exist in this backyard. As I stood there in the winter sun, listening to the soft hum of 30,000 bees going about their business, I thought about how strange life was. A year ago, I had been in the middle of a divorce, lost and purposeless. I had moved to this neighborhood thinking I wanted peace and anonymity. Instead, I had found myself in a battle that had tested every part of me. But I had also found community, purpose, and the satisfaction of standing up for something I believed in. The bees had been the catalyst, but the real story was about refusing to be bullied, about fighting for what was right even when it was expensive and exhausting. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. She had sent a photo of herself holding her second-place science fair ribbon, grinning widely. The caption read, "Can't wait to work with the bees this summer. Love you, Dad." I smiled and sent back a heart emoji, then took a photo of the hives with the winter sun behind them and sent it to her. Her response was immediate, 3 bee emojis and a honey pot. The afternoon was fading into evening, the temperature dropping as the sun lowered. I packed up my beekeeping tools and headed inside, already planning the spring expansion Emma and I would do together. There was still work to do, always work to do with bees. But it was work I loved, in a home I had fought for, in a neighborhood that was finally learning to leave people alone to pursue their own happiness. The letters from the HOA stopped coming. My mailbox held only bills and catalogs and the occasional newsletter about community events. The security camera I had installed still recorded, but there were no more midnight incidents, no more mysterious vandalism. Life became pleasantly boring in the way I had originally hoped for when I moved here. Tom and his wife invited me over for dinner one Friday evening in February. Several other neighbors were there, including Donna and her husband, and a couple from 2 streets over who had just started their first hive. We ate grilled chicken and roasted vegetables, and the conversation inevitably turned to bees. "I can't believe Patricia tried to have them destroyed," Donna's husband said, shaking his head. "What a waste of energy." "She was scared," I said, surprising myself. "Scared of losing control, scared of change, scared of not mattering. People do crazy things when they're scared." "That's generous of you," Tom said, "after what she put you through." "I'm not excusing it, but I understand it better now, and holding on to anger just makes me miserable. She's gone, the bees are fine, and we all won. That's enough." The conversation moved on to other topics, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't been able to for months. These were my people now, my community, built not through HOA meetings and regulations, but through shared interests and genuine friendship. It was what I had been looking for all along without knowing it. Spring arrived with the explosion of wildflowers that makes the Arizona desert magical. My bees worked overtime, visiting poppies and lupines and brittlebush, returning home heavy with pollen. I added honey supers to all 3 hives, anticipating a strong harvest. Emma visited for spring break, and we spent hours in the backyard, suited up and working side by side. "Dad, do you ever regret all the trouble with Miss Moreland?" she asked while we were checking frames. "Sometimes," I admitted. "It was stressful and expensive, but if I had given up, I wouldn't have these." I gestured at the hives. "And I wouldn't have learned that I could stand up for myself. After the divorce, I felt like a failure. Fighting for the bees helped me remember that I'm stronger than I think." She nodded seriously, her face obscured by the beekeeping veil. "Mom says you always give up too easy, but you didn't give up on the bees." Her words stung a little, but they were true. I had given up on my marriage, maybe too easily, accepting my ex-wife's unhappiness as inevitable rather than fighting for what we had. The bees had been different, maybe because they were mine alone, or maybe because I had finally found something worth fighting for. "Sometimes giving up is the right choice," I said, "and sometimes fighting is right. The hard part is knowing which is which. I think you made the right choice with the bees." "Me too, sweetheart." We finished the inspection, and Emma helped me bottle some honey from the winter stores, her careful hands filling jars and sealing them with the satisfaction of completed work. She took 6 jars back to Tucson with her, planning to give them as gifts to her teachers and friends. The HOA held its annual meeting in April, and I attended out of curiosity more than necessity. Bob, the new president, ran through the agenda efficiently. There was discussion of repaving some streets, updating the pool equipment, and organizing a neighborhood garage sale. Nobody mentioned bees or violations or enforcement. It was almost anticlimactic. Afterward, Margaret Chen approached me. "I just wanted to say thank you again for how you handled everything. A lot of people would have sued us into oblivion. Your willingness to settle probably saved the HOA from bankruptcy." "I didn't want to destroy anything," I said. "I just wanted to be left alone to keep bees." "Well, you've certainly started a trend. We have 8 households keeping bees now and more planning to start. There's talk of doing a neighborhood pollinator garden at the entrance." "That's great. The more bees, the better everyone's gardens will be," she smiled. "Funny how that works. The thing Patricia was so afraid would ruin property values is actually making the neighborhood nicer. People are talking to each other again, sharing honey and tips on growing things. It's brought the community together." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. The battle over the bees had shaken up the neighborhood's complacency, forced people to think about what community actually meant. Some had sided with Patricia, but many more had quietly supported me, or at least been relieved when she lost her power. Now those people were finding their own voices, their own interests, and connecting with each other. The honey harvest that summer was my best yet. 90 pounds from 4 hives, each jar a different shade of amber depending on what flowers the bees had visited. Emma and I spent a week bottling it all, designing new labels with her artwork of smiling bees wearing tiny crowns. We kept some for ourselves, gave away most of it, and I even sold a few dozen jars at a neighborhood garage sale for $10 each. A local news station somehow heard about the story, the whole saga of the HOA trying to ban bees and how it had backfired into a neighborhood beekeeping movement. They sent a reporter out in August to interview me. I almost said no, not wanting to drag everything back up, but Emma convinced me it would be good for promoting beekeeping. The interview was short and relatively painless. They filmed B-roll of me working with the hives, Emma holding up a frame of honey, and several neighbors talking about their own bee experiences. The piece aired during a slow news week and got more attention than I expected. My phone rang for days with people asking questions about getting started with bees. I put together a simple information packet about Arizona beekeeping, including resources, regulations, and tips for beginners. Donna and I taught a free introductory class at the community center that attracted 40 people. The hobby was spreading beyond our neighborhood now, reaching across Phoenix and into surrounding suburbs. In September, I got an unexpected letter. This one was from Patricia, postmarked from Flagstaff. I almost threw it away unread, but curiosity won again. The letter was handwritten, 2 pages of careful script. She updated me on her life, living near her daughter and grandson, working part-time at a community garden. She had started therapy and was learning to find purpose beyond control and authority. She thanked me again for accepting her apology and said that she hoped I was well. At the end, she wrote, "I saw the news piece about the beekeeping movement in Meadowbrook Estates. It made me cry, but in a good way. I spent years trying to make that neighborhood perfect according to my narrow definition, and all I did was make people afraid. You came in and made it better just by being yourself and refusing to back down. I hope someday I can create something positive instead of just trying to control everything around me. Thank you for teaching me that lesson, even though I fought it so hard." I folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer. I didn't need to respond, and I suspected Patricia didn't expect me to. It was enough that she had written it, that she was trying to change. People were complicated, capable of both terrible and admirable things. Patricia had been my antagonist, but she was also a person struggling with her own demons. I could acknowledge that without excusing what she had done. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures, and the bees began preparing for winter again. The colony population dropped as the queens reduced laying, and the workers focused on protecting their honey stores. I made sure each hive had enough food to last through the mild Arizona winter, and wrapped them lightly for protection against the occasional cold snap. Emma came for Thanksgiving, and we spent the morning checking hives before heading to her mother's house for dinner. She was 13 now, growing taller and more confident. She talked about maybe studying environmental science in college, maybe working with pollinators professionally. "You know, Dad, none of this would have happened if Miss Moreland hadn't tried to take away your bees," she said while we were putting away the beekeeping equipment. "That's true. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes. Do you think she knows that trying to hurt you actually made everything better?" "I think she's starting to understand. She sent me a letter. She's doing better." Emma nodded, satisfied with that answer. We went inside and washed up for dinner, the hives humming softly in the backyard, 3 boxes that had changed everything. The year turned, and I realized it had been a full 12 months since the first violation notice had arrived. A year of battles and stress, but also a year of growth and community building. The bees had been the catalyst, But the real change had been in me and in the neighborhood around me. We had learned to stand up for ourselves, to question authority that overreached, to build something positive instead of just following rules. The HOA was different now. Bob's presidency was marked by common sense and restraint. Violation notices became rare and were only issued for genuine problems like dead trees that posed safety hazards or houses that became actual eyesores. The neighborhood began attracting younger families who had heard it was a good place to live, not stuffy or oppressive like some HOA communities. Property values, the thing Patricia had been so obsessed with protecting, actually increased. Turned out that happy residents and a reputation for common sense were better for home prices than rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules. The real estate agents started mentioning the beekeeping community as a selling point, a sign of an environmentally conscious neighborhood. I continued keeping my 4 hives, teaching classes, and mentoring new beekeepers. It became a regular part of my life, something I was known for in the community. The divorced guy with the bees who stood up to the HOA. It was a better identity than I had expected to build when I moved here. Emma graduated middle school and started high school in Tucson. She joined the environmental club and did another science project on bees, this one about colony collapse disorder and pesticide exposure. She was growing into a passionate, engaged young woman, and I like to think our time working with the bees together had contributed to that. 2 years after the initial battle, I was at the grocery store when I ran into Richard Steele, Patricia's lawyer from the restraining order hearing. He recognized me first. "Mr. Jenkins, right? The bee guy." "That's me." He laughed and shook his head. "I've got to tell you, that case was one of the most educational of my career. I primarily do corporate law now, got out of HOA work entirely. Too much crazy. But your situation taught me something about state preemption law that I've used a dozen times since. So thank you for that. Glad something good came from it. Oh, more than you know. I've advised 3 other HOAs since then to back off from similar overreach, cited your case every time. You created precedent that's protecting people all over the Phoenix metro area." I had never thought about it that way, that my small personal battle had ripples I couldn't see. It was a strange feeling, knowing that strangers were benefiting from my stubbornness. The seasons cycled, the bees did their work, and life continued in its imperfect, complicated way. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. Work was stable and satisfying. Emma visited regularly, and we maintained our tradition of working the hives together. The neighborhood remained peaceful, a place where people could pursue their own interests without fear of arbitrary punishment. 3 years after it all started, I harvested my best honey crop yet, over 120 pounds from 5 hives. I had expanded again with Emma's help, adding a 5th hive and mentoring 2 more neighbors who were starting their own. The garage sale where I sold honey had become an annual event, with multiple beekeepers contributing. We donated the proceeds to the local community garden, supporting their pollinator habitat project. Tom and his wife moved to Colorado to be near their kids, but we stayed in touch. He called me on the anniversary of the first HOA meeting disaster to reminisce and laugh about how crazy it had all been. "You know what the best part is?" he said over the phone. "Patricia actually did you a favor. If she had just left you alone, you would have kept bees quietly and that's it. By trying to stop you, she forced you to fight, and that fight created a whole movement. She made you a community leader." He was right. Though I had never thought of myself that way. I was just a guy who wanted to keep bees. But circumstances had forced me to become more than that, to stand up and speak out and fight for what I believed in. In doing so, I had found purpose and community, and a version of myself I hadn't known existed. The bees continued their work, oblivious to the human drama they had inspired. They collected pollen, built comb, raised brood, and made honey. They did what bees had done for millions of years, following instincts and patterns that predated human civilization. There was something beautiful in that simplicity, something I tried to carry into my own life. 4 years after the initial violation notice, the HOA formally recognized its beekeeping members with a small plaque at the community center entrance. Meadowbrook Estates Pollinator Community. It listed the households that kept bees and thanked them for their environmental stewardship. Margaret Chen, who had remained on the board, spearheaded the project. At the unveiling, she gave a short speech. 4 years ago, this HOA made a mistake. We tried to enforce rules without understanding why they might be wrong. One resident had the courage to push back, and that pushback made our community better. This plaque is a reminder that rules serve people, not the other way around. And sometimes the best thing we can do is get out of the way and let good people do good things. Emma was there for the unveiling, visiting for summer break. She was 16 now, preparing for college applications, still passionate about environmental issues. She stood next to me as they revealed the plaque, and I felt her hand slip into mine the way it had when she was little. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart." That evening, we did a final inspection of the hives together. The colonies were strong, the queens productive, the honey stores abundant. Everything I had fought for was right here in these 5 boxes, humming with life and purpose. As we were closing up the last hive, Emma asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just given up? If you had removed the hives when Miss Moreland first told you to?" I thought about it, really considered it for the first time. I'd probably still be here, still living in this house, but I'd be smaller somehow, diminished, and the neighborhood would still be afraid of Patricia or whoever came after her. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it's hard, even when it costs you. Not because you're sure you'll win, but because giving up costs even more. She nodded, understanding in a way that made me realize she wasn't a kid anymore. She was becoming an adult, someone who would face her own battles and have to decide when to fight and when to walk away. I hoped the lessons she had learned watching mine would serve her well. The sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that rivaled the best honey. The bees settled in for the night, and Emma and I went inside, leaving the hives to their quiet work. Tomorrow they would wake and fly again, collecting nectar and pollen, doing their part to keep the desert blooming. And I would wake and go about my own work, knowing that I had stood for something, that I had refused to be bullied, that I had created something good from conflict. The bees had been the excuse, but the real story was about standing up and fighting back and finding out what you're made of when someone tries to take something precious away. Patricia Moreland had tried to seize my beehives because she saw them as a violation of her vision for what the neighborhood should be. In her attempt to control and suppress, she had sparked something much bigger than either of us. The bees had handled it in their own way, simply by continuing to exist, by being too valuable and too loved to be removed. They had been my teachers in persistence and purpose. Years would continue to pass, the bees would keep making honey, and the neighborhood would go on being a place where people could pursue their passions without fear. That was the legacy of standing up to Patricia Moreland and the overreaching HOA. Not just my bees surviving, but a whole community learning to be better, and in the end, that was worth every dollar, every stressful moment, every hour spent fighting. Because some things are worth fighting for, even when the battle seems impossible. Especially then.